Everybody, welcome to your Module 6 overview video. I know you just saw my face last night if you're watching this on Tuesday, but I wanted to go ahead and just record everything here. Sometimes I don't do module overviews if we just had class the night before, because sometimes I'm able to go over everything in person, but I could sense from the room and also myself that we were getting really tired towards 8:30. So apologize for this video not being posted sooner today. I had some last minute things at the university that needed my attention early in the morning, and then I had to hop in the car and drive back to Birmingham to pick up my son from school. So I just got here and I have about 30 minutes until I need to pick him up. So Module 6 is our Affective Needs of the Gifted Part 2. We already talked about some of the social emotional needs a few modules ago. I had to split it up, and so here kind of follows Part 2 of that. Quick review. So, what we mainly covered this past week and last night was focus on the special populations in our gifted students, in our gifted population, but also we looked at some introductory terminology and frameworks for identification. I usually really try to stick with a closing reflection to some of our in-residence sessions, because as you know, like just best practices of teaching and learning, like to have some sort of culminating activity or just space where we come back and really try to reflect and digest what we just saw or listened to or learned. It's helpful. I didn't want to do that last night because we were all tired. But do keep in mind some of these two questions about either what aspect of a gifted identification was new to you and how does this inform your practice in the classroom. I know some, again, elementary teachers, you might be a little bit more familiar with identification practices because you're in it. Much more so than our middle school and high school teachers are. And that second question, how do you plan to apply what you learned today in the special populations presentation in your classroom tomorrow, or let's just say this week or next week? Hopefully some of those presentations, some of the comments that they said resonated with you. Everybody did a fantastic job with your special populations presentation. A lot of you synthesized a lot of material from many different sources, and sometimes that's hard to do, especially in 20 minutes. And I think a lot of you hit the main points that at least the field or the literature really covers and knows about some of these students. Granted, we know that there's still research being done with a lot of our special populations, and so there's still a lot we have left to learn, and I'm going to vote that probably you all who are in the classroom and with these students most of the day are probably you probably know all of that already, and you don't need a research article to come out 4 years from now to tell you some of these things. So I'm going to skip this for just a moment. For Module 6, your assignment is to read 2 of the chapters. I've uploaded a bunch of PDFs onto the website under Module 6 that all cover, again, affective or social emotional needs of gifted students. Pick 2 of them, 2 that either just perk up your interest, or maybe you have a student in mind that you really want to reach and you want to read one that pertains particularly to that student. I did include some of those are strictly, or not strictly, but do mention more about adolescence, affective needs of adolescence. So that's stuff that you don't often get in the Davis and Rim textbook for our middle school and high school teachers. So some of those topics include asynchronous development, which we talked about in that first in-residence session as just being development that's out of sync. Their mental capacity is far beyond their emotional capacity, and that distance there, that variance can kind of create some internal struggles perhaps, or just qualitatively different experiences. Social coping, so looking at how giftedness affects their social lives with their classmates, the stigma that giftedness can have, the social emotional needs of students of color, identity development, multi-potentiality, that's like having multiple talents and being pulled in many different directions, and peer relationships. So feel free to pick amongst those. Your assignments that are going to be due September 17th at midnight. The first one is literature review number 1. You're going to have 2 literature reviews for this course number 1, and throughout some of the other courses you also have additional literature reviews. So this is your first. Most of the time they're going to be roughly very similar in nature as to how you write them up. I have not here because I wanted this literature review instead of I have a big folder of a bunch of tons of articles that you can just pick and choose which one you want to review. But in efforts of not adding more reading to this week, I'm just having you choose one of the 2 PDFs that you read. already, and I'll review those guidelines in just a moment. And then to familiarize yourself with the case study assignment, which is due in Module 10. So the literature review, you're going to submit a reflection. Once I find my mouse, I don't see my mouse to move my face. So sorry about that. So I know what it says. You're going to submit a reflection on the chapter that you read. Make sure that your document needs to be labeled as it's labeled, Lit Review number 1. And then please have the title of the article, the authors, and the year that it was published. Here these are chapters. Please include 2 paragraphs summarizing the chapter, 1 to 2 paragraphs of your primary takeaways from it, 1 to 2 paragraphs about how you can connect and apply what you learn in the chapter to your classroom or to your interactions with gifted students. And then 1 conclusion paragraph with any final reflections. This can be implications for the field of gifted education, or implications for advanced math classes, or such and such, or questions you still have about the topic. These final reflections can also include if you want to challenge the authors in anything, or be kind of play devil's advocate, or maybe you just believe something different and want to offer up that. That's what that final conclusion paragraph is for. So please organize your lit reviews in this way. I'm hoping that by giving you the structure, it just makes it easy to know kind of what I'm expecting. So depending on how much, how verbal you are, how much you want to write and reflect will depend on how long it is, but it's going to be roughly 2, 3, 4, at least 5 paragraphs, maybe 7, no longer than that. For your case study, in general, and I'm going to navigate to the guidelines in just a moment, the case study is you're basically going to choose a gifted student. It can't be your own child. It can be someone in your classroom. It's probably going to be the easiest if you have a gifted student in your classroom that you want to kind of take this little kind of case study approach to, or someone else that you know who might be in a different classroom. You're going to collect some data, and I'll tell you what that data is in just a moment. And then you're going to reflect on how that student displays traits or characteristics of giftedness, perhaps with respect to a special population, if this child is indeed kind of fits into a special population, now that you've got some of that knowledge or tools in your back pocket. And then you're going to share your observations and findings with your colleagues. So you are going to present your little case study in Module 10, which is when it's due. They're going to be small group presentations, just 10 minutes. And that 10 minutes is maybe just like 5 to 7 minutes of presenting. And then those last minutes of interacting with your colleagues, answering questions, or just oftentimes I find you start to share reflections of how people who are listening to you also have similar students and that sort of thing. You're going to prepare it in a Google slideshow. The small group presentations is going to be similar to like a poster session. If you were to go to a conference, you're basically going to present your case study twice to 2 different small groups. And so that way you'll have an option of kind of whose group you want to go and listen to and choose, and then you get to pick someone else before we move into the next round. And I'll describe more of that later. It worked really well last year. People like kind of grown like, oh my gosh, I got to present it twice, but then they realize like, oh, I actually really liked that. And they're really short, so it's going to be informal. But again, I will navigate to those details now. So let's look at those. Back on your website under Course 1, if you navigate down to Module 6, this video will be there in a moment. Here's where you're going to have the 6 different chapters you can choose from for your readings. And then I'm going to navigate you to your case study assignment. So you'll click that. I've already got it pulled up, so I'm just going to pull it up right here. And so here are a little bit more details. So you're preparing a case study of a student whom you teach who's also in the gifted program, cannot be your own child or relative. And this is what you're going to do based on, or for your case study. So for your case study, you're going to create a presentation, and if you want, these numbers here, numbers 1 through 9, can just be slides in your presentation. If you want, you're welcome to go beyond, but this is as simple as I'm kind of asking it to be. A slide that introduces your student. Please use a pseudonym and eliminate any direct identifiers. So direct identifiers would be things about the student that we could be able to name who that student is. So usually first and last names, etc. Include any obvious characteristics of giftedness that you've observed in the student. Number 2, any test scores, aptitude, achievement, or any other available data that you have. I know you guys are usually able to pull up a good bit in terms of like their Lexile scores and such. So a slide that has that. You're going to, for slide 3, interview one source, or I'm going to say interview source number 1. You're going to have a personal interview with a student. And this can be very informal. decide, I have kind of asterisks on there, ask the student either, or the questions can be related to the student's giftedness, achievement, what they think about the gifted program, what their interests and strengths lie, anything you feel is appropriate to ask the student. Now, you don't want to like pry deep into their lives, and you're not a psychotherapist who's trying to get at their social emotional needs or anything, but to kind of have an open conversation about either what's it like to be gifted, or, you know, I notice your scores in math class are really high, that's where your strengths are, but what are some other classes that you feel really strong in or that you don't feel strong in? Just somehow giving us a sense of who this student is, and maybe how they relate to their giftedness. Now, be mindful that when you ask the students these questions, this might be the first time anybody's even asked them, like, what does giftedness mean to you, or what's giftedness like? So just be mindful of that. For the fourth piece of data, you're going to also interview a teacher of the student, so a different teacher. And again, you can decide what types of questions you ask, but that slide is going to kind of summarize what your conversation was with that teacher. Interview, slide number 5 can be an interview from source number 3 or source number 4, and you'll see in the rubric, if you do all 4 sources, you get a little bit more points, but I'm just going to say 3 of 4. That's going to result in an interview with the student's parent and or peer. So you can interview the student's parent if you want, or the peer, or you could do both to kind of start to really capture information about how, what the student is like. Data item 6 is student work samples. So just a few examples that will help give your audience insight into your student. So that's why I'm saying having a student in your classroom, in your class, is going to be maybe easier to do this. Again, try to eliminate, when you photocopy things or whatever, eliminate their names. For item 7, gather specific strengths and weaknesses of the student, including any special or affective needs. And that can be gathered from any of your interviews, from just your own personal work and observation with the student. Item 8 is teaching strategies and educational options best suited for the student. So these are just, what are your ideas? I know we haven't done the methods and materials section, so you're not going to know like, oh, I'm going to use this gifted education aspect of it. But in your opinion right now, as a teacher, as a very good teacher, what are your ideas about what you can do to help that student? And then item 9 is just a summary slide that describes describing not what you learned about the student, but about what you have learned from doing the case study assignment. So you've already summarized the student, but here this is a personal reflection about what you learned from this whole, taking this approach to this kind of case study. So your presentation, again, is going to be a Google slideshow presentation. That's so everybody will be able to click it and access it. You'll have 10 minutes to present. I've recommended here for each of the items 1 to 9 above, have at least one slide dedicated to each item, clearly labeled, so that way I can really find it. You're welcome to go in that order. You don't have to be super creative, although you're welcome to. Please note any observations or characteristics of giftedness that were manifested, making particular note of how any of those might be very unusual to help make your case study come alive. You're just going to put that in your Course 1 folder. And then down here is your rubric. So you can clearly see the case study elements of the basic information, the interviews that you gathered, synthesizing, summarizing, and the overall quality of your presentation. Notice here that with the interviews, if you interviewed all 4 people, you're going to get the full 6 points. If you just interview 3 of the 4 people, you maybe get 4 to 5 points. So if you're the A-type personality, so you can do all 4 and get the 100% or the 30 out of 30. But it looks like a lot of you guys are doing well on some of your other assignments. So just be mindful of what you can finish in the time that you have. So again, this is due in 5-ish weeks. It's due in Module 10, but I'm saying it to you now so you can start planning of what maybe the student that you're going to look at and how you're going to start collecting that data and summarizing it. Remember, you only have 10 minutes, and within those 10 minutes, I want you to leave some time for your peers to ask questions. So it's really brief. You're not presenting a dissertation. You're just giving some insight into one of the students that you have, and in just a little bit more organized way. So that's your case study that's going to be due in Module 10. And then that's it. That's all I have for you. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your week. Again, thanks so much for hanging tight last night. And I will see you in Module 10, which is our last in-residence session. But other than that, I'm free via email. If you have any questions, send them my way.